Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I am your host, Kage, joined by my co-hosts,
Neff.
And Buttons.
and today we are talking about Dune, all things Dune. You've heard us talk about Dune in previous episodes. We've mentioned it many times. We are big fans of this film, these films, this story. Recently, we just had Dune 2 came out, and it is fair to say it's been a fantastic success, a very enjoyable experience. People out there, if you are listening to this, please, please, please do yourself a service and go see this film on the big screen, on IMAX if you can. It is absolutely an experience. So my short bullet point on that is I absolutely loved the film. I'm an avid, I'm not a big reader, but I have read Dune about 3 times, 2 or 3 times, I'd say, in my life. I know about the miniseries. I've played games. I'm kind of a lore master, and as much as I just said there, I'm pretty sure there's going to be some details we're missing on that. It's a beefy story, but let's get into it. I'm going to kind of go around the table real quick and just kind of get people's thoughts on the recent Dune film. Tell me what you guys think about it. Neff?
Yeah. Like Kage said, pretty good movie. I gave it an 8.6 out of 10, pretty solid. That's a slight upgrade from the first film, but it made sense. You know, they're covering the first book, the first film that we saw in 2021. That was the first part of the first book, and so this one is the second part of the first book, part 2, of course. So I thought it was a step up. You know, you're getting more action in this one. I'm not going to necessarily say the dialogue is more important in this one. I feel like the dialogue is even keel with the first part. You know, it's important, but I've said this to multiple people outside of our podcast. I don't feel like the dialogue was the strength of the film, and it didn't need to be, because everything else that they do fairly well, it kind of makes up for that. And, you know, they're trying to show you a lot of things too. There's dialogue where there needs to be dialogue, and you need to be paying attention to certain things and certain characters, but outside of that, everything else takes over, and it makes it a complete film. I mean, I'm very excited for part 3. As we talked about, they're covering part 1 and part 2 of really just the first book. Part 3, it looks like they're going to go and hit Messiah, which is the middle book of the main trilogy, which I want to say really covers Paul Atreides' life. But yeah, awesome film. Go watch that. We're going to talk about the budget. We're going to talk about what the film made and stuff like that. But that's just my quick review on the film. Like I said, very excited for part 3. Visually epic. Writing was very good. It's the best film that I think, that I've seen. I can speak for myself, that I've seen this year as a whole. So we'll see what else Hollywood has to bring to the table to try to compete. But this one looks like it's probably going to win a couple Oscars, especially in that visual department. So I'll pass this one on to Buttons, and she can share her thoughts.
Okay, so we watched the second one the opening weekend.
Yes,
so
we did.
Definitely was one for the books.
Oh, yeah.
And worth it as far as, you know, watching it in the theater, having that full theater experience. I mean, you know, we've talked about different movies that, you know, come out and we see the previews and we're like, you know, that one is I'm gonna red box or wait till it goes to streaming. But this one definitely, you know, from the get-go, we're like, gotta see it in theaters. So for those of you who are thinking about going and seeing the second one, who have not seen the first, it's definitely worth going to watch the first one before you see the second one. There's a lot of characters, and even, you know, I have not read the books, but I can tell you there's definitely some parts in the first movie as well as the second that I feel like if you'd read the books, things will make a little bit more sense. And that is, unfortunately, you know, any of these films that we have that are based off of books, you're going to run into those scenarios where there's going to be some things that are left out or things that are, you know, hastily kind of thrown together to try and move the story forward without spending so much time, you know, either budget-wise or just length-wise to kind of condense the story and make it easier for the audience to digest who haven't read the book. So, you know, you definitely got a little bit of play in that. For me, the story in the first film was again, as Neff mentioned, it's part of the book. So, just like any story that you're going to see, you're going to have an arc, right? A story arc. So that's why when you're watching the first movie, it feels very slow to build to that, that finale, because you don't get that in the first
Exactly.
movie. You get a cliffhanger.
Right.
And, movies like that, you got the original Lord of the Rings trilogy. I mean, you're just going to end up having, but because each one of those movies was its own individual book, you still had a nice little arc. With this one, because they're splitting it in half, the arc is a little bit harder to see. It kind of slowly builds, and then it just kind of tapers off into, oh, now you're going to go see the next movie. So a lot of the information in that first movie, I felt like you're kind of like, you're wanting more. You're like, where's the action? Where's the meat and potatoes of the film? And with the second one, that's why it's so great. And as Neff mentioned, you get a lot more of the action. You get a lot more of that satisfying, okay, things are happening. And if you haven't seen the first film, you're going to be lost. you're going to be like, wait, when did that character show up? And wait, okay, they drug this guy in, but where did he come from? And having said that, I really enjoyed it. I gave it a really high score as well. I feel like it was a good 85 for me. And the original film was closer to like an 82. So or part one, I should say. And that pretty much wraps up my comments on the movie.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, for me personally, I gave it a 9 out of 10. I feel like they did a great job across the board, from casting to the location. I think we've talked about it in other episodes where, we talk about how much effects you use, blue screen and all this stuff. They actually flew these actors out, I think, to the Jordanian desert. So when you see them running through the sand, hot and stuff, that was real, and I appreciate that they went to those lengths to make a good film. I really enjoyed the action. I really enjoyed the effects. It was not excessive. It was right where it needed to be. I kind of wonder how much of that budget went into the worms. Okay, and by the way, I opened up saying, you got to go see this in theaters. There is nothing cooler when you're sitting in the theater, I don't care if it's IMAX or wherever, and you're looking at a giant screen and the worm is like, makes the people look this small, but you as an audience member, you're also seeing the worm and you are also this small.
Right.
That's just an experience you can't get at home. I don't care if you
Scale.
have exactly. I don't care if you have an 85-inch TV with surround sound. That is all well and good, but when you can feel the worm roar in your chest, like that's only an experience you can get in the theater.
And I will interrupt you real quick, and just mention that the soundtrack for both of these films is very good at making you feel like what is going on, because of the bass, because of the way that they brought those scenes to life with that soundtrack. It really adds to it. And when you're listening at with high def speakers in a big auditorium like that, it really reverberates
Yes.
throughout the theater, and it
Good
just
point.
makes you feel.
Yeah, good point.
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah, because I believe they had Hans Zimmer, a famous movie composer. I guarantee you everybody listening here has heard something from Hans Zimmer from movies all throughout our lives.
Oh, very extensive career.
Very extensive career, yeah. So it's good to see that they got a great composer behind this. But yeah, as far as like other details that I'll say about the movie, about the film, I believe that they really kind of, I don't know if it's the right way to word it, answered some prayers. There were some people, some of my friends, some of my family, not going to name any names, some coworkers who saw the first film and were like, oh, it was good, but it just kind of fell flat. It just ended, and it's like, trust me, this is just the setup. We're telling you the characters, we're setting up the narrative, we're setting up the world. The next film is going to be where, okay, we don't need to introduce anything. We know what's going on. We know what the stakes are. Let's jump right in. And yeah, they did that. So should have prefaced this by saying spoiler alert, because we're going to be talking a lot about Dune. We'll try to keep the spoilers to a minimum for part 2, because we really want you guys to go out and see that. But the first one was very slow. It was a lot of talking. There was some action. The story of Dune is a very complicated one. It is a story of politics. It is a story of love, of betrayal, of prophecy. You know, it's a lot of different things. So I don't care what genre of movie you're into, this will scratch that itch. And then part 2 just goes off on that in the best way possible. It will. You wanted to see more action, you're gonna get it. That little cliffhanger ending you got in part 1, oh no, we're going straight to it. And just like Button said, there are plenty of references, name drops, locations, whatever that they mentioned from the first film. So please do yourself a service and go see the first film. But as far as this one, they hit all the marks for me. I absolutely loved it. But next thing up, we're going to talk about the budget of Dune 2. Now, I want to throw a little nugget of information that kind of made me grin ear to ear. When we first talked about Dune, about doing this particular episode, you know, we're big on budget here at Popcorn Square. And at the time of looking it up, here we go, folks, hold on to your pants. Budget was 190 mil. Box office was 189 mil, okay? Between then and now, that box office, it was 189 mil. The last I checked, it was now 379 million. So I guess it's safe to say Dune 2 was a success. Yeah. And it kind of makes me wonder, you know, I don't see that too often where films get that much of a jump, because we saw the movie early on when it first came out, and the box office at the time, you know, it was still pretty early. You read the reviews, you heard it online. People, Dune, people are talking about it. If nothing else, they're talking about the popcorn bucket. No, did not get that. None of us, I don't think any of us got that. But you saw the jokes.
I didn't even see the popcorn bucket, but that's all right.
It's okay.
I mean, I saw the pictures. I'm just saying at my movie theater, I didn't see the popcorn bucket.
Yeah. So, when I first saw the box office, I was like, okay, it's not as high as I thought, but let's see how it is in a couple weeks. And sure enough, in a couple weeks, and understand, folks, that is worldwide. Mm-hmm. This movie is getting just blasted everywhere, but in the best way possible. So that's amazing. What do you guys think about that?
Oh, yeah, and I'll add on to that. So I just checked right now, and it's at 494.
Woo!
Yeah, 494.7. So, you know, we're almost at that $500 million mark. Pretty good. I'd like to see about 570, 600. I think that'd be a solid number. We already know they're most likely going to greenlight 3, and it just makes sense. You know, we got to finish up that trilogy right there. So that's going to happen. But like Kage was saying, pretty solid numbers. This thing's on a lot of screens, a lot of eyeballs. And plus, as I've talked about on the Popcorn Square podcast and the weekly, good press, bad press, how it can affect a movie. I think this is benefiting from good press. So, based off that, I think the movie will do more. I don't know what it will top out at. Who knows? You know, it could keep going. It could get a second wind and just pick up another set of legs and keep going. But we'll see what happens there. Like I said, this is all good for Dune. And, you know, we talked about the budget, $190 million, right? Very good budget, especially for what you're getting. Like I said, I've talked about movies like this before, and I might have referenced Dune Part 1 as well. You could take a budget where it's like, you know, $160, $190 million. Yes, that's a lot of money. But when I'm watching this film on screen, it looks like it cost about $250, $300 million. And that's the point. How can I take X amount of money and make it look like a bigger amount and just like, you know, really just take it to another level with the budget that you have. And there's people, directors, executives, they kind of understand this. More probably directors, but once you can figure that thing out, that's how you can really extend the amount of money that you put in, bring it up to scale, and then benefit off of that. And I think Dune is a product of how you actually use your budget properly. The first Dune, Part 1, 2021, I believe that was $165 million. So yes, they beefed up the budget a little bit, but there's also more players involved and more big actors involved. So it makes sense. I think it's a relatively tame budget. As I've said, I've talked about this on the weekly, $190 million for a movie that looked like it cost $300 million. That's how you're supposed to film movies. How many times, guys, have we seen movies cost $250 million and you're watching the movie and you're saying, oh man, I mean, what are we doing here? That scene's a little off. You know what I mean? So, gotta applaud Dune for that. I believe even a Messiah, it might even cost less because there's a lot less action going on in that book. We're not really gonna get you guys spoiled into that. I would advise that everybody read a little bit into that. And I would also say that, you know, out of all those 3 books that we're covering in this film, and they're not going to get the Children of Dune or anything like that, from what I can see, Messiah is the shortest book, 256 pages. So if you're going to read any Dune book, of course, do yourself a service and read the first one so you know what you're getting into. But the second one is going to be the easiest to get through if you're not really into reading and stuff like that. But as I've said, great budget, great box office so far. Want to see what it tops out at. I want to see $570 million hit. More than likely, it's going to hit that. I'd say probably in a span of 2 weeks, right? That's just me speculating. But applaud them for that. I'll pass it off to Buttons for her thoughts.
Yeah, so I would say that as far as the box office is concerned, it definitely had a very healthy budget, which is great because, you know, I'm sure, you know, if I were to get Kage going on it with the original Dune movies, you know, it's night and day in terms of the quality behind, you know, the graphics and just the sheer look of it. And I'm sure you could make the comparison with like the original Star Wars with like, you know, when they're on Hoth or when they're on what was the name of the sand?
Well, you're talking about like A New Hope?
Yeah. I mean, like there was a sand blowing all over the place. You couldn't see shit. So,
Right.
Excuse me.
Oh, you're
see
fine.
We're
all adults.
but you know, that I believe was one of the biggest complaints with the original Dune movies that they did is that you have a planet that's covered in sand, and you know it's really hard to see if you're not able to clean that up to where you can actually don't just see like swirls of sand all over the place. And one of the things that is really great about these movies is, as Kage mentioned, you know, they're on location for a lot of these scenes that are in the sand, in the desert. You know, you're not sitting there going like, oh, this was filmed in California. You know, you can tell that they're actually in places where, you know, you've got really good dunes and actual, you know, huge mounds of just endless desert when you're looking out on the landscape, which really gives it that further quality to making it look like you're on a completely different planet. And I mean, granted, it's shot on Earth, so we know it's not a different planet, but you know, I know, right? It's shocking.
Eureka.
But you know, when you're talking about that's where that budget is going, is all of the extra filming in different locations. I mean, when when you're watching those credits roll at the end and you're seeing just all of the different places that they filmed, it really gives that grandiose, you know, I don't even know what to say, the, you know, credit to the film. It's just, you know, they're doing it in such a way that it actually gives that film that longevity that you would look into. You know, movies when they're filmed, you know, they get aged over time, and it's graphics and it's, you know, just the film quality and things like that. But this, with the quality that went behind it, it's not going to look aged for many decades before it's going to look like, oh man, that was terrible. Like back in the day, you remember back in the day when, you know, they used tinfoil and, you know, Christmas lights, and like, no, there's none of that in this film. You're going to be like, man, the quality was great. Yeah. And it's really going to give it that longevity in terms of, rewatching generations, from now.
Rewatchability. Yeah.
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 Well, I mean, something you can show your kids. And,
Absolutely.
And your kids are going to be like,
You-
oh, yeah.
And you bring up a good point. So for me, I got started on Dune was kind of put on me as a kid. I've known about this story for a very long time. It was introduced to me by my father through an old PC game, and I absolutely loved it. And that PC game used cutscenes from the 1984 movie. And what's funny, you got to realize, I was a kid playing this game, and I was like, and as a kid, I'm like, wow, they really went all out. That
Right.
At the time, that is the first time I ever saw that in a game. And then my dad goes, that's a movie. And I go, what? And I went over to Blockbuster, and me and my friend, I got him playing the game, and we both got into it, and I slept over his house, and his mom rented us. We watched that movie as many times as we could, and back then we were like, that's all we had. And then as I got a little older, I was told, hey, that's not just a movie, it's based on a book. And down the rabbit hole we go. Started reading, started looking up other games, started looking up Wikipedia, started checking out the books. Again, I'm not a big reader, but Dune, aside from Stephen King's It, is probably the biggest book I have ever read willingly multiple times. That should say something, I'm a sucker for sci-fi, and well done. Frank Herbert. It's absolutely amazing. And I feel like I did a disservice to my co-hosts here because I forgot to bring the book. I wanted to bring the book with me. And the reason why is because this book, at the end of it, it actually has an encyclopedia of terminology telling you what certain things are, what certain people are, reminding you, because it's going to constantly, you got to think about it. The story is so massive, so dense, that they had to add an encyclopedia at the very end. That way you can sit there and say, oh, who is this character? What is this thing? I'm going to butcher the word, the Kwisatz Haderach, that they keep mentioning over and over and over again. Like we said, Dune is a story of prophecy. And as much as I've read the book and seen the sci-fi miniseries, I kind of wonder how much was there a real prophecy and how much was fabricated by the Bene Gesserit.
Yeah.
Because this is a very deep story, and you can go. I think it's. I don't know. Neff, would you say that you could compare this to Matrix in a way where every time you watch it, you learn something new? You can go as deep into it.
I think you would see that more in the books.
Okay, and
Rather
that's
than
fair.
seeing it on film, because the film is pretty straightforward, because the book, like
Yeah.
you said, has a lot of details.
Sure.
So they're trying to make it as digestible as possible on screen. So
Makes
it's
sense.
not going to be too much of that, they think about this and that. When you do the side-by-side comparison, you could say, okay, the prophecy, the Messiah, the one, same type of archetype. You know what I'm saying? So, good point there.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's important to remember here is, this story came from, 1965, and who knows how long it was floating around in Frank Herbert's head before he actually put it down on paper.
Funny you brought that up. I'm going to speak on that, but go ahead, continue.
But one of the things I will say is there's a very strong comparison here with the epicness or the the large breadth or scope of this, that I think that, comparatively, the only other series that would have been able to compete in terms of that nature would have been The Lord of the Rings. And, even with The Lord of the Rings, it's got those things that you're mentioning. It's got some extra things in the book to kind of help you, maps and character references and the dynamics behind it so that you can familiarize yourself, because he created a whole world, and so Frank Herbert, he's got to basically give you these tools so that you can understand as you're reading the book, because you need that reference, you need those things that are going to help ground, what's going on in the story with what is actually happening in the world, so that you can make
parallels.
those, you can find those little things. And like you said, as you read books, of that grand scope like that, you're going to find little nuggets. You're going to find those little things where you're like, it wasn't clear early on, but now I see how it's tied,
Or it comes up later in the story.
right,
and
or
reveals.
even in other books.
Right.
And so that's one of those great things that writers are able to do, the good writers anyway, are able to like pull you into the story and then throw just little hints here and there that when you see it come all together at the end, this giant web of interconnected, storytelling where you're like, oh man, this character, and I had no idea. And all of a sudden, it culminates in this big finale where you're like, oh, now I know why they said all those things and did all those things.
Right.
And it makes
It all
sense.
makes sense.
Exactly. So
Good point there. But like I was saying, very good follow-up there, Buttons. But I actually did some deep diving on YouTube and stumbled across an interview from 1969 with Frank Herbert that was recorded. He was being interviewed, and the guy was asking him, like, what inspired him to do Dune. And he actually came up with a lot of the information throughout the 50s. And then made the book. But he said he did about 12 years of like research
Right.
on everything regarding sand dunes and how almost like controlling sand is an economy in the real world. And based off that research, he came out with this story in 1965. So I thought that was really interesting. It's about an hour and 20 minutes long. I listened to the whole thing. So it was really good. So yeah, he said he just went really into it. He's like, I had like 10 years of research.
Yeah.
He's like, so it's kind of just like filling up a glass. He was like, I had all this research. So he said he started to just take different elements from different things, and then that became Dune. So once again, guys, it's almost like this guy is the James Cameron before James Cameron, where it took him 12 years just to conceptualize the story. And then he has the story. So sometimes that is the creativity arc and how long it takes to actually build something that, when you see it, you think, oh man, guy probably came up with that in a year. But no, a lot more goes into what people see at the end point. And so it gives you a different angle on just the creative process. I think a lot of people don't really look into or kind of take for granted. So I thought that interview was extremely interesting, and I'll be sending it to you guys both.
Yes, please.
But yeah,
That sounds fascinating.
I think we did hit the budget. We hit the box office there in the same scope. Yeah, I mean, I expect this thing to, the way it's looking, I'm gonna say 650, 700 million. That's what I'm expecting. End game. Kage, what do you think?
You know what? I didn't know what to think when this first came out. I knew it was going to be big, but I didn't know how big. Like I said, at the time, I saw 189 and it jumped to 379. And while I'm talking, Neff tells us that it's went up even more. So I don't think it's outside.
495 now.
I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility to think, 700 mil.
Buttons?
well, I mean, I definitely think that the budget for this film, it really does need to hit those numbers. Just because, we talk about production budget versus like what the budget is actually probably including all the advertising. Probably for a movie this big was an extra 100 million easy, just on all of the different press related advertisements, trailers, everything else that goes into it. Even the terrible popcorn bucket. Somebody got paid to design that.
Yeah, no one's talking about that, right?
It sparked great
There
press.
were you got to think about it. There was like a board meeting. They were
There
talking
was
about
about
funding.
this,
There was an artist in a marker board. Like, okay, what's this thing gonna look
This
like?
is gonna work.
Exactly. So, I mean, when you look at it, I do hope that it's going to get over that 650 mark. I think that'll really kind of cement it. It's unfortunate when you think about, how far, the box office has come down over the years because of the pandemic, and just because
Yeah.
of the, the adding of streaming and as opposed to having to go pay for something in the theater.
Right.
But this is definitely one that I would urge anyone to just watch it in theater. It's worth it. The visuals and, like I said, that whole soundtrack experience that you get from the theater it's just
All encompassing.
yes, all encompassing, and everything that people loved about the theaters back before the theaters became, unclean and not worth the money.
Right.
Damn you, inflation. But it's definitely, for me, I'm thinking it's going to get around the 650 mark. I'm hoping that's what it gets to, at the very least.
Very nice. Well, guys, I think that's going to end it for this broadcast of the Popcorn Square. As we've spoken about, this is just part one of our Dune review, Dune Part 2 review, and we're going to be doing Part 2 right now. So I'm going to leave it there for this episode. I'm Neff with
Kage.
And buttons.
you guys. Please like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, leave comments, interact with the videos. We love your interactions. We love your comments. We like to see what you say about Dune, especially if you watched Dune Part 2. Please comment on it. We'd love to see that. Anyway, that's going to do it for this episode of the Popcorn Square podcast, and we will be back for Part 2. Be safe.